Have you ever wondered what you would do if you discovered that someone had infiltrated your family and was ready to destroy everything in a matter of days? This is the story of someone who thought they knew how to recognize danger until they realized that the threat was smiling at the breakfast table, calling numbers that no one knew, looking at every detail of the house as if everything was already theirs. I remember the suspicious conversations, the quick glances, the strange questions about money, and how each reaction seemed planned so that no one would suspect anything. There was no manual for surviving a scam like this, but there was the real fear of losing everything. My story as a survivor begins before the tragedy, but for you to understand what took me to this limit, I need to go back and show you how everything seemed normal until that weekend. It was supposed to be a perfect weekend. The date had been marked on my family's calendar since the beginning of that year. May 26, 2023, Napa Valley. The name already brought back memories of old vacations, conversations around the table, and dreams that seemed too big to ever come true. I was born in Sacramento, but I grew up in small towns in Northern California, always surrounded by the sound of train tracks and the strong smell of my mother's coffee early in the morning. My life was simple, but my world was intense, full of commitments and obligations that pulled me in all directions. I work in project management at a technology consulting firm, with a tight schedule, meetings that start early and sometimes end after 8 at night, but I always found a way to make time for my family. My brother, Eric, has always been the person with whom I shared everything, from silly jokes to the most serious conversations about money, fears, and dreams. If someone had asked me, until recently, who my safe haven was, I would have answered without hesitation. It was Eric. He was born 2 years after me, in the fall of 1991. We both grew up watching my father, Richard, work 12 hours a day as an investor, someone who never lost control, even under the greatest pressure. My mother, Susan, held everything together at home. She was the kind of woman who could cook a dinner for 10 people even without planning anything. My father had always kept to himself, but after a glass of wine, he would tell stories about his days selling books door to door. My mother spoke little, but she observed everything, even when no one else understood. The truth is that Samantha's arrival brought an excitement to our family that I hadn't seen in a long time. She first appeared at a Thanksgiving dinner late the previous year. It was as if she already knew exactly what to say, how to please, and how to fit in with the inside jokes that only someone who has known the family for years would understand. I was surprised when, a few months later, the wedding invitation arrived. It was printed on thick paper in a shade of green that reminded me of the region's vineyards. May 26, 2023, at 3 p.m., Oakwood Vineyard, Napa Valley, California. My name and my husband David's name appeared in gold letters at the top. When I read it, I thought about how many times I had imagined seeing my brother get married. It was never one of those childhood dreams. In fact, Eric never seemed to be in a hurry. He always preferred to live one day at a time, as if time were infinite for him. So when he announced the wedding, my mother cried. My father, who doesn't get emotional easily, was silent for a few seconds, and then smiled in that discreet way that only family members recognize. I myself stayed up late thinking about what that day would be like. At work, I told my colleagues about the wedding. Some were surprised, while others asked if Samantha was really everything she seemed in her Instagram photos. Friendly, pretty, with a degree in communications, and an easy smile. I've always avoided judging someone based on their first impressions, but I admit that, right away, Samantha always seemed one step ahead. When she showed up, she changed the vibe of the room, joked with everyone, complimented my mother's dishes, and knew exactly what to say to win over even my father, who usually didn't open up to anyone new. In the preparation for the wedding, I was involved in every detail, from choosing the dress to the party's music list. The Oakwood Vineyard Ballroom was one of those places where every detail was designed to impress. Light wood floors, huge windows overlooking the grape fields, white marble tables, dark wood chairs, low lighting in the early evening, smelling of wine and lavender. Just remembering the smell of that place makes me feel like I'm back in that day. David, my husband, is a civil engineer, and he's methodical, even when it comes to packing his suitcase. We've been together for 7 years, married for 5, and every time we had a trip, He would make a list on his phone app with everything he couldn't leave out. Before leaving home, he reviewed the invitations, put the gifts in the trunk, carried the heavy bags to the car, and checked the route on the GPS to avoid getting stuck in traffic on Interstate 128. My father organized a chartered bus for relatives who were coming from far away, just to make sure no one would be late. Everything was meticulously planned, as if it were impossible for anything to go wrong. I remember the day we hit the road. It was 11:20 a.m. when we locked the front door, and on the way, David commented that this was the kind of weekend we needed to cherish forever. I stared out the window, watching the landscape change from the city to the open fields, thinking how strange it was to realize that my family was moving again. Even after so many years of living together, the anxiety was great, but at the same time, there was a feeling that we were finally turning a page, that it was time to make new memories, leave the past behind, and celebrate the beginning of a new phase for all of us. I didn't know, but that would be just the beginning. What happened next? No one could have predicted. And now tell me, if you had to hand over your family's safety to someone who just arrived, would you trust them? Write in the comments what your decision would be. I want to know if, in my place, you would let it go or follow your instincts, even with everyone looking askance. The drive to Oakwood Vineyard seemed endless, but when we finally arrived, Samantha was standing right at the entrance, laughing loudly with one of Eric's aunts, as if she had been part of the family for years. She had the kind of beauty that effortlessly drew the eye, nothing over the top but impossible to ignore. She wore a simple light blue dress, her hair tied back in a way that left her face bare, and she was always ready for a photo, always with the right answer to any joke. My parents, Richard and Susan, were instantly enchanted by her. Samantha's smile was enough to make my mother laugh, and my father raise his glass of wine and make an impromptu toast. Eric couldn't stop looking at her, and it was impossible not to notice that his manner had changed since they started dating. He spoke more slowly, laughed at everything, and looked as if there was no one else in the room. The first night passed like a light movie. We ate dinner together at a huge table, my cousins were all there, and even distant relatives showed up. Samantha not only remembered everyone's name, but she also knew details about each person's life, complimented my mother's recipes, and made jokes about Eric's old nicknames. I even thought she read the messages in family groups in secret. She adapted so quickly. At first, no one noticed anything strange, but as the hours went by, certain details began to bother me. While everyone was having fun, I noticed that Samantha changed her cell phone twice that night alone. The first time, she picked up a small phone with a transparent cover, then put it in her bag and pulled out another one with a black cover, this time larger, with a cracked screen in the corner. I remember thinking that maybe she had a work phone and a personal phone, but even so, I couldn't get it out of my head. As soon as I mentioned it to David, my husband, he would immediately say that it was just my imagination, that nowadays everyone uses more than one device to keep track of their bills, friends, work, and social networks. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. The next morning, while we were having breakfast on the porch, Samantha sat down next to me and started talking about investments. She asked about my father's travels, about the wines in the cellar, and most importantly, about his work. The conversation seemed normal to those who weren't paying attention, but there was something wrong with her tone, a different, insistent curiosity, as if each answer wasn't enough. She asked more than once if my father still invested in international stocks, mentioned the names of companies, talked about investments in funds, and then tried to find out if he had a house outside of California. With each question, I felt a tightness in my chest, as if there was a weight there, and I started answering in short sentences, trying to get out of the conversation. Lunch was even stranger. At the main table, Samantha repeated the story of how she met Eric to a group of guests, but her version was different from the one she had told my mother and me the night before. Before, she had said that she had met Eric at a conference for the company where she worked. This time, she said that it was at a coffee shop near his office in Oakland, and she mentioned the name of the coffee shop and the type of cake they had eaten that day. My mother noticed too, because later she called me into the room to tell her that she didn't remember this detail about the coffee shop, and that she had found it strange how Samantha had remembered the exact address. I said that maybe it was party nerves, that people get their stories mixed up when they're excited, But deep down, I was suspicious. Later, while dinner was being prepared, I caught Samantha texting on her second phone, the one with the black cover, and when she realized I was looking, she put the phone away so quickly that it looked like she had been startled. David was in the room, sorting out his clothes, and when I came back to tell him, he just laughed, saying that the Sale was creating theory where none existed. At the end of the day, after the guests had left, she was the last one to leave the kitchen. She stayed a few extra minutes to talk to my father about real estate investments, asked about the types of contracts he made, complimented his intelligence, and before leaving, asked for the contact information for the family lawyer. I listened to it all, standing in the hallway, feeling my stomach turn in a bad way, but unable to say anything. That night was the first time I caught myself thinking about writing down each of these situations, so I wouldn't forget them later, as if something inside me was trying to warn me that I had better be careful. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. At the rehearsal dinner, I was already exhausted from walking around the tables so much, but I kept paying attention to every movement, because there was something strange in the air that I couldn't explain. We arrived at the hall around 7:15 p.m., and, like every event my father planned, everything was impeccable. The lights were low, there was an instrumental soundtrack in the background, and lavender and eucalyptus arrangements on the table. I didn't know what to expect from Samantha's so-called family, because up until that point I had only heard a few stories and seen 2 or 3 photos on Eric's phone. They arrived at the last minute. Her mother, a man who they said was her uncle, and a woman with very short blonde hair, who didn't really introduce herself and stayed in the corner playing with her phone most of the time. Unlike our lively and noisy side, they seemed scattered, somewhat disconnected from each other. I soon realized that Samantha's mother, who introduced herself as Margaret, stayed in the dining room for less than 20 minutes. She sat down, ordered a glass of water, congratulated Eric, and then left, saying she had to take an urgent call. The uncle, who must have been someone close to her, answered in monosyllables the entire time, without looking anyone in the eye. I asked Samantha what her childhood in Boston was like, and he simply replied, "Easy," without giving any details. Even questions about work, family, and travel were answered automatically, without any warmth or shared memories. The woman with the short hair left even earlier, and I had to restrain myself from commenting to David, because I'd never seen a family act like that at such an important dinner. My mother tried to make conversation, asking about childhood photos and the school where Samantha went to, but the answers were always vague, like, "She's always been studious. We've lived in a few different places, you know," and nothing else. There was a moment when I noticed Samantha leaning against the bar counter, watching everything from afar. When someone from our side of the family approached, she would change her tone of voice and smile, but when she was among her family, she would become serious, quiet, and even seem uncomfortable with their presence there. This caught my attention, because it wasn't just a lack of intimacy. It seemed like they didn't really know each other, or that they were trying to avoid too many questions. Later, when everyone was around the piano with Eric playing that Beatles song he always insisted on repeating at events, I looked at Samantha in the back of the room. Her face was still, almost tense, but as soon as someone called her for a photo, she would change her expression in a matter of seconds, smiling and pulling someone by the arm as if she were part of a happy family commercial. While the waiters were serving dessert, my father approached Samantha's mother, trying to make conversation about the areas of Boston and her daughter's childhood. She looked away, said she wasn't good with dates, and shortly after, got up to talk on the phone outside. People started to whisper that the bride's relatives were strange, but no one could pinpoint a specific reason. Just that uncomfortable feeling you get when you're watching a movie where nothing matches. I also noticed that none of them took pictures together, nor did they even sit close together at the table. Even during the toast, they each sat in a corner. The most disconcerting thing was that, despite the distance between her and her own family, Samantha insisted on getting involved in everything on our side. She helped my mother choose the flowers for the centerpiece, complimented my father's speech, and took my grandmother's arm to help her sit down, as if she had been there for decades. But when she walked past her relatives, she seemed to change completely. Her gaze became cold and rigid, and her smile disappeared as if it had never been there. I watched her for a while longer, waiting for an explanation, but nothing made sense. If someone asked about a cousin or aunt, they would laugh, change the subject, or say they had lost contact a long time ago. When I approached the table to ask about Samantha's school, the answer was just a generic name, and then her mother left for the bathroom without even waiting for the next question. The strange atmosphere grew until the end of the night. My uncles started to comment that this was the most reserved family they had ever seen. Poor Eric. He was so excited about the wedding that he didn't seem to notice anything, and every time he looked at Samantha, all he saw was the smiling person she showed him. But while everyone was talking about the party the next day, I kept watching, sensing that something was wrong. At the last minute of dinner, I caught Samantha alone near the garden, fiddling with her cell phone with a hard expression, and when she noticed me, she put the phone away and tried to make conversation as if nothing had happened. It was the first time I noticed the stark difference between the perfect image she portrayed and that silent coldness when she thought no one was looking. At that moment, I was sure that this was just the beginning. I thought I knew what fear was, until that day. After that night, my mind didn't stop for a minute. I woke up before 6, opened the bedroom window and stared at the vineyards for a while, trying to convince myself that it was all just an excess of worry, but it was no use. The strange atmosphere between Samantha and her supposed family was still stuck in my throat. I went down to breakfast, already determined not to let go of her, but that morning, it was David who noticed something strange first. We were in the hotel lobby. It was 8:45 in the morning, when I saw Samantha raise her voice to one of the employees. The woman, with a blue badge with the name Julia, had only asked if I needed anything else for breakfast, but Samantha answered in a rude way, almost cutting off the air in the room. It didn't last more than 10 seconds, but it was dry, direct, and no one but David noticed. She turned her back, fixed her hair, and when she saw my father coming towards her, she smiled that seemed like an advertisement. It was automatic, like turning on a light. David looked at me and couldn't hide his discomfort. For the first time, he didn't try to find an excuse for her behavior. During the coffee, he remained silent, just observing, and then he invited me to talk on the balcony, away from the noise of the other tables. Did you see how she changed from one moment to the next? He was direct, as always. I nodded, unable to hide my tension. David said he had seen this type of behavior before, of people who could adapt their way of acting to each person, without ever showing who they really were. He told me about a case he had seen at the hospital about 3 years ago, involving a patient who had been cheated in a relationship. I remember it was all very similar, he said. The way they spoke, the stories that changed depending on the audience, even the practiced smiles. The guy lost almost $200,000 and only realized it when it was too late. Up until that point, I had always seen David as the practical type, the kind who preferred to trust logic. But as soon as he started to connect the dots, everything started to get a little more complicated. He watched Samantha for the rest of the morning. At lunch, he paid attention to every detail. The way she laughed out loud when Eric said something funny, the way she complimented my mother whenever someone else complimented her own dish, the way she insisted on sitting next to my father at every meal. The whole time, she seemed to be studying everyone's reactions, changing her words as the audience changed. Around 3 o'clock, when everyone had gone to the pool, David pulled me aside again. "Do you think I'm exaggerating?" he asked me. But before I could answer, he already had the frown on his face, like someone who knows something is wrong. He suggested we talk to Jeff, our longtime friend who works in private security and technology. Jeff is the kind of person who seems to be on constant alert, always a bit suspicious of everything, but he had already saved many people from trouble in situations that no one expected. "I can send a message to Jeff now, at least so we can clear up any doubts, you know?" David said, almost as if asking for permission. I didn't even have to think too much. I just said yes. At that moment, David grabbed his cell phone, went to a corner of the parking lot, and made the call. The signal there wasn't the best because of the hills and the distance from the cell phone repeaters, so he went back to his room to get a better connection. I was alone for about 20 minutes, looking at Samantha in the garden, talking to my cousin as if I didn't have a care in the world. When David came back, he told me that Jeff had asked for all the information he could get. Samantha's full name, the names of the relatives who were coming to the wedding, and any details that seemed out of the ordinary. I spent the rest of the day trying to act normally, while inside I felt a persistent tightness. Time didn't pass, and every time I passed Samantha, she would give me that big smile, ask if everything was okay, ask if the party was just how I had imagined it. It was only late in the afternoon, after a walk along the Vineyard Road, that I realized that David was already convinced. He came back outside, sat next to me, and said quietly that from that point on, I could no longer ignore the signs. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. David's phone rang a little after 7:40 p.m., when most of the guests had already spread out in their rooms or were in the dining room tasting the wines. He went to answer it, walking to the back of the parking lot, because the signal was better outside. I sat on the wooden bench near the lobby, watching the movement of the hotel restaurant, trying to pretend to be distracted, but the truth is that I couldn't stop looking at my watch. When David came back, his face was different, pale, a little sweaty on his forehead. He sat down next to me, lowered his voice, and said that Jeff had sent a message asking us to talk in private. We went to our room, and as soon as I closed the door, David showed me the screen of his cell phone. There, in small print, was a list of names and information I'd never seen before, all connected in some way to Samantha. Jeff had searched private databases, the ones used by security companies to check criminal records, identity records, and legal alerts. He explained in a message that these systems are similar to those used for background checks on employees in sensitive positions, and oddly enough, any detail that doesn't add up is a red flag. According to his report, the name Samantha Wilson was linked to fraudulent documents, and there were at least 2 other names associated with the same Social Security number, Erica Donovan and Catherine Miller. Jeff was blunt. Samantha, or whatever her real name was, had records of check-ins and check-outs at luxury hotels in at least 4 different states. He enclosed copies of reservations made in Palm Springs, Denver, Seattle, and Miami, all on dates close to large family parties and events for well-known businessmen. In each case, the payments had been made with different cards, and on at least 3 occasions, the cardholder had contacted the bank alleging misuse of the information. There was also one detail that made my stomach clench. Jeff found an FBI alert filed on February 15, 2022, for a woman using the name Catherine Miller, suspected of participating in a multi-million-dollar scam in Chicago involving international wire transfers and theft of investment account data. Jeff's message was short but heavy. Rachel, this woman has a history of high-end crimes. The scams involve wealthy families, usually at private events. She always changes her identity, changes her phone number, and disappears as soon as the job is done. I'm gathering more information, but I recommend that you and David be careful and notify whoever is necessary. Don't trust any information that comes from her without double-checking it. I read it and felt my hands start to sweat. I took a deep breath, sat on the edge of the bed, and all I could think about was Eric, his face so excited, completely oblivious to the risk he was taking. David tried to reassure me, saying that Jeff was a stickler for detail and that there might still be some mistake. But the dates matched. Samantha's name appeared on hotel reservations, car rental contracts in different names, and even bank accounts opened in cities she never said she lived in. David suggested writing down every detail and saving anything that seemed odd, including the names, license plates, and even the check-in and check-out times of Samantha's relatives, to pass on to Jeff in case he could get in touch with a federal agent. One of the attached files was a photo of a forged passport in the name of Erica Donovan, taken by security at Denver International Airport on October 23, 2020. The face was Samantha's, no doubt about it. Same hair color, same expression, only the name on the document had changed. When I tried to sleep that night, I kept going over it all in my head, as if trying to fit each piece into an impossible puzzle. I remembered Jeff's story about the Chicago scam. The victim had lost over $800,000 in fake applications. The FBI was never able to locate the perpetrator because she disappeared without a trace, changing her identity yet again. My body was stiff, my breathing shallow. My mouth felt dry and I had to drink a glass of water to calm my nerves. David tossed and turned in bed, restless, unable to close his eyes for more than 15 minutes. All I could think about was Eric, how much he trusted her, and our family there, completely exposed. I remained silent, counting the seconds until the sun rose, hoping that none of what Jeff had said was true. But I already knew that it was just the surface. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The next day began before 6, with light filtering through the bedroom curtains and David already up, staring at his cell phone screen, as if the world could collapse at any moment. I spent the night trying to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eric's name mixed in with those fake IDs, hotel reservations, and falsified passports. Before 7, David called to talk, speaking quietly so as not to wake the others. He said that, looking at everything calmly, it made sense that Samantha's exaggerated interest in my father from the beginning. She always asked about trips, companies, bills, and now, putting it all together, it was clear that Eric was just the gateway. David recalled a quick conversation with Jeff the night before, in which he mentioned a pattern of these scams. The main targets were never the bride and groom, but rather relatives with wealth. The victims were families accustomed to privacy, old money, investments in hedge funds, and offshore accounts. I remembered how many times I had picked up Samantha near my father's office, using the excuse of using the computer, supposedly because I needed to research vendor contracts for the party. My father had always been suspicious, but he was not a tech-savvy. He used the laptop to access bank accounts, transfer money, respond to lawyers, and rarely locked everything properly. The computer password was simple, a combination of Eric's birthday and the initials of our last name. At breakfast, I took advantage of a moment when my mother went out to get bread from the bakery down the street and asked David to keep an eye on Samantha while I talked to my father. He was sitting at the table on the porch, writing down contract details in an old diary, one of those leather models he had been using since 2002. I tried to make conversation in a natural way, asking if everything was okay with the computer. He laughed and said yes, that Samantha had even helped him update some programs so that the Wi-Fi connection would no longer drop during video conferences. When I heard that, my stomach turned. I asked to see his laptop, pretending to show him photos from the party, but as he picked up the device, I looked over and saw Samantha talking to one of Eric's cousins, gesticulating a lot, laughing loudly, pretending to be normal. With the laptop in hand, I pretended to go through the photo folders and open the browser. The history showed that, in the last 3 days, someone had downloaded strange files, an extension called Remote Access Tools, which is actually a program used to access computers remotely. It is sold as a tool for IT technicians who need to fix machines without being physically present, but it can also be used to spy on everything that happens on the screen, including bank passwords and confidential documents. I asked if he remembered authorizing any update of that kind, and he said that it was Samantha who insisted, saying that it was important so that the video would not freeze during the broadcasts with the lawyer. I was overcome by silent anger, trying to remain calm so as not to arouse suspicion. I quickly closed the laptop and said that I would help install a better antivirus later. I went back inside, sat down with David in the living room, and told him everything. He texted Jeff with the information. Jeff responded in less than 15 minutes, confirming that this type of program was the main tool used by cybercriminals to clone passwords and access accounts remotely. He suggested that we immediately turn off the computer, unplug it, and store it in a safe place without connecting it to the internet again until it could be analyzed by a professional. We did this in a hurry. I told my father that the laptop had a problem with the charger, so he just laughed and told me to fix it however I thought best. The tension in that house grew so much that even my brother began to notice. Eric asked if everything was okay, because he could feel the strange atmosphere. I replied that it was just the stress of the preparations, trying to dispel the fear that he might realize the size of the risk we were all in. David remained alert the entire time, walking around the house with his cell phone in his hand, talking quietly to Jeff. At 10:20, we received a call saying that it was best not to say anything to Samantha until we knew exactly what else she had managed to access. Jeff warned that in situations like this, criminals can act quickly to cover their tracks or disappear overnight, so every precaution was never enough. My nervousness grew until I couldn't contain it any longer. My hands were sweating, My mouth was dry, and every step Samantha took around the house was like a warning signal going off inside me. All I could think about was how fragile everything was. My father's accounts, the investments that had been saved for over 20 years, our entire family history dependent on a click, a file installed in seconds. It wasn't just a ruined marriage. It was a real, concrete risk of losing everything, and it was impossible to predict what could happen from then on. Sunday dawned sultry, even by Napa Valley standards in late May. From the early hours, my head was spinning, and David's face showed no sign of tension. The post-wedding brunch was supposed to be one of the highlights of the weekend, a time to celebrate, take the last family photos, and wrap up all the commitments. But with each passing minute, the urgency only grew. I looked at Samantha surrounded by guests, laughing, eating strawberries, hugging Eric, and inside I felt everything was stuck. David pulled me by the arm near the entrance to the ballroom, and I almost tripped on the red carpet. He spoke softly, barely moving his lips. Now, if we wait any longer, she might disappear or erase everything. My hands felt cold, and I tried to take a deep breath. While Samantha was busy with a distant aunt who insisted on showing me photos of her newborn grandson, I went straight to the table where my parents were discussing the details of the party. I spoke bluntly. "Dad, Mom, I need you to listen to me now. This isn't about the party. This is serious." My father dropped his napkin and my mother turned pale. Eric, who had come in from the garden, sat down next to us. The words came out in a rush, but I managed to explain in less than 2 minutes. False documents, altered passports, spyware on the computer, FBI alert. With each sentence, my father became quieter, his hand tightening on the arm of the chair. My mother stared at her teacup, as if trying to wake up from a bad nightmare. Eric stood still, unresponsive. I didn't know if he believed me, but the fear was already written on his face. David, without wasting any time, grabbed the laptop we had stored in the office closet and, together with me, turned off the Wi-Fi on the main router and unplugged the computer's power cord. Jeff had been clear in his message, no leaving the device on or connected to the internet. I kept my eyes on the hallway, ready to make up any excuse if Samantha showed up. My father just shook his head, mumbling dates, trying to remember if he had done anything unusual in the last few days. David wrote down the exact times of each strange access to the computer. 10:17 p.m. on Thursday, 11:24 a.m. on Friday. Every detail was written down, as if it were an improvised dossier. I grabbed my cell phone, went to the backyard, and dialed the FBI number Jeff had given us. I had never called any authorities in my life, and my hand was sweating so much that I almost dropped the phone. The FBI operator asked me to calm down, asked for my name, address, and detailed technical questions about the computer, the names involved, and the type of software installed. In less than 6 minutes, she was already asking us to stay away from the equipment and wait for a federal agent to contact us. Meanwhile, outside, Samantha was still smiling, chatting as if nothing was out of place. My mother asked to go to the bathroom, and when she came back, she sat with her head down, without saying a word. Eric finally managed to ask, "How can this be true?" David explained that he had seen cases like this before at the hospital, people who lived for years under false identities, leaving behind digital trails that were almost impossible to trace. I could only think about what could happen if Samantha realized what we were doing. Jeff left a voice message, advising her to avoid direct confrontation. He said that if she became suspicious, she could try to run away or delete all the files on her laptop in seconds, and that there had been similar cases in California where criminals had disappeared without a trace after just a suspicious glance. Every step inside the house became a cause for alarm. I even thought Samantha had heard something because, at a certain point, she looked back and fixed her eyes on the office door. I hid in the hallway, holding my laptop so tightly that my hands hurt. David left the office and, with a tense face, said that the FBI would call again in half an hour to update the instructions. I asked my father to delete any banking information from his cell phone, change the main passwords, and be alert to any strange movements. No one was able to eat. My mother dropped her cup on the floor. Eric tried to find some plausible explanation for everything, and all I could think about was the risk of Samantha escaping before the police arrived. The mood at brunch changed completely. Relatives started leaving, not really understanding what was happening. The clock in the living room was showing 11:58 when I heard the landline phone ring, the sound echoing through the almost empty house. My father answered, said simply, "Yes, sir," and hung up right away. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mix of fear, tiredness, and embarrassment. The instructions were to wait, keep everyone calm, and, if possible, gather the family in one place, away from the computer and bank passwords. Samantha, unbeknownst to me, was walking through the garden, stopped to take a picture with Eric's sister, and then walked away to make a call on her black cell phone. I didn't know what to expect in the next minute. It was like being trapped in one of those crime movies where everything could fall apart before the final credits. It felt like one slip-up was enough for everything to be lost. I could no longer hide my fear, but I had to pretend to be in control. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. The next few minutes seemed to drag on as if time had stopped. The FBI call made everything more real, and seeing my father pacing back and forth, speaking softly on the phone, only increased my anxiety. It wasn't long before the tension exploded. David locked his laptop in the office closet, grabbed Jeff's phone, and asked everyone to gather in the main room. My father closed the door behind us with a sharp click. My mother sat next to me, her face as white as paper. Eric had his arms crossed, still processing everything, while my hands felt sweaty, waiting for something I knew would be impossible to control. Samantha walked into the room smiling, still wearing her brunch dress, her hair done, and her attitude as if she didn't owe anyone anything. Eric called her name, but she didn't even look at him. My father took the lead, direct, the way he always did in business. He placed the sheet David had printed on the table, full of dates, names, and records. "I think it's time to explain everything, Samantha. Or should I say, Alexandra?" She looked at all of us, then at the sheet, and at that moment I knew the show was over. Her smile widened, but in a mocking way. She tossed her hair back, sat in the armchair, and crossed her legs. "You guys are faster than I thought," she replied out loud, without a hint of shame. Eric looked as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He asked again, almost in a whisper, "Who are you?" She ignored his pleading tone and continued to stare at my father. "My name is Alexandra Kovacs," she said, almost as if she were proud of her disguise. "And you could have made the most of it. Now it's over." My mother began to cry softly. The silence was so thick that I could hear the ticking of the mantel clock. David stood up, took his phone out of his pocket, and said firmly that he had already reported everything to the FBI and that agents were on their way. She smiled again, but this time without kindness. "Do you really think I'll fall for so little? Do you know what you could lose if I open my mouth?" She tried to threaten us, talking about scandals, fake news, important names that she could drag into the mud. She listed the names of my father's friends, mentioned figures, mentioned details of the latest investment board meetings, as if she wanted to show that she knew exactly where to move to cause the most damage possible. My father didn't seem to be shaken. He just picked up the landline, dialed the FBI number, and left the line open on the table. "If you make any threats, you'll be charged with even more crimes. People are listening to everything." Alexandra stood up, grabbed her purse, but David stood in the doorway blocking her way. For a second, I thought she was going to attack him, but she just dropped her purse on the couch, laughed, and said she was used to situations like that. Eric was paralyzed, his hands clasped on the back of the chair, breathing quickly. My mother stared at the floor, unable to lift her head. Silence fell again, as if no one knew what to do. Time was slow to pass. I heard a car pull up in the driveway, and then 2 sharp knocks on the door. My father was the one who opened it. 2 federal agents came in, identified themselves without raising their voices, and asked Alexandra to follow them to the car. She couldn't resist. She just gave us one last look, her face completely different from anything she had shown before, cold, without any trace of regret or shame. The scene seemed out of place, as if that ending didn't belong to our story. But it did, and no one knew what to do with that absolute silence. After she left, no one moved for a while. The clock read 1:12. The smell of cold coffee and spilled wine seemed to stick to the walls. My father was still talking to the agent on the phone, going over every detail of the computer, the files, the accesses. My mother wiped her face. Eric remained motionless, and I tried to write down everything I could remember. When the door closed behind the agents, the house had never felt so strange, nor so empty. But what no one there knew, not even David, was how much that silence would echo long after that day. The rest of that day faded from my memory, as if someone had erased the details. The wedding, which was supposed to be the highlight of Eric's life, became a forbidden topic in our house. When the court papers arrived, officially canceling everything, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Eric had disappeared for almost a week, disappeared with his car without a trace, and only reappeared when my father personally went to look for him at a small bed and breakfast near Sausalito. I had never seen my brother like that, so silent, walking around the house as if everything around him had lost its meaning. For the first few nights, his bedroom door was kept closed and the lights turned off, and the silence weighed heavily on even the brightest days. The psychologist my mother had found, who specialized in family trauma, started coming to the house twice a week. The sessions with Eric were long, always after dinner, and no one dared ask what was being said in there. My mother, who had always held everything together, became different. It was as if she had shrunk inside her own clothes. She began to wash the dishes slowly, to sweep the yard even when there was no dirt, and to sleep with the bedroom door open, as if she were afraid that something even worse could happen. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and hearing her footsteps around the house, going downstairs to warm up milk or look out the window. The shock did not go away with Alexandra's arrest. It came back in small scares, in sleepless nights, in doubts about who was trustworthy and who was not. I tried to be strong, to give answers, to take care of both of them, but every time I looked at Eric, I felt a different kind of tightness. My father, perhaps for the first time, showed that he was not invincible. In the days following the scandal, he locked all the important files in the office, installed new digital security systems, changed passwords, and hired a company to review every internet access made in the house in the last few weeks. He even replaced the old safe in the basement, keeping only essential documents inside. We had to learn to talk again. Meals became longer because no one wanted to leave the table too early. We talked about everything except Alexandra. My father, who had always been strict, started to listen more, asking about Eric's work, asking my mother's opinion on small things. I think that was how, slowly, the house started to breathe again. It wasn't quick. It took months for the tension to dissolve, for someone to actually laugh or plan a family trip without remembering what we almost lost. After almost 2 months away from the office, Eric went back to work with my father, but he only agreed after everyone agreed to share the tasks and maintain total transparency in every financial decision. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he was direct. He never brought up the subject of the wedding again, at least not in front of me. Some nights he still called his therapist, other nights he stayed up listening to music until late, but little by little he got his rhythm back. Over time, my mother became even more protective, but also more sensitive to the weaknesses of others. She organized Sunday lunches and made sure to bring the whole family together, even if it was just to eat a simple pie in the kitchen. My father remained vigilant, but less authoritarian, perhaps because he understood that, in situations like these, there is no absolute control over anything. I myself needed time to trust people again, and above all, myself. Intuition became an ally, no longer a reason for doubt. I began to notice signs, observe behaviors, trust more in small suspicions, without fear of seeming paranoid. Even today, I still can't understand how someone could have the courage to invade a family so coldly, remorselessly destroying bonds that took decades to build. But looking back now, I see that it was pain that pushed each of us to a new place. The marriage was annulled, the wound remained. But little by little, our family was rebuilt with new rules, more honesty, and the certainty that no one emerges from a storm like this the same. The scars remained, but they also served as a reminder. We learned to recognize danger where before we only saw charm, and to value even more what can never be bought or stolen. Today, it's been almost a year since everything happened. Eric left California in early February and started his life over in Chicago. where he accepted a new job at a smaller company, far from the social circles that were part of our daily lives. He rented a simple apartment, didn't want a farewell party, just told us that he needed fresh air, anonymous neighbors, and distance from everything that reminded him of that time. I talk to him almost every week via video call, and even though it still bears scars, I can see that he's stronger, less naive, someone who's learned to question and also to forgive himself. The last time we spoke, he said he wasn't thinking about dating or getting married yet, but now he felt like helping other people avoid falling into the same kind of trap. He volunteered at a support group for victims of scams and, little by little, he's regained some of his joy. Alexandra Kovac, or whatever name she uses now, has been indicted for fraud, identity theft, and participation in a criminal conspiracy. We discovered that, over the past 5 years, she has traveled through at least 8 states, left traces in luxury hotels, and robbed families at parties, auctions, and charity events. The FBI has called me a few times asking for more details, and I know that there are still other victims out there, perhaps without the courage to admit what they went through. Her case has not been reported in the newspapers, but among agents and lawyers, her name is already synonymous with alert. My father keeps in touch with the agent in charge, and each new piece of news is received with silence, mixed with the relief of knowing that, at least this time, we managed to prevent something worse. If there's one thing that stuck with me forever, it's the bitter lesson that no one is immune to this kind of threat. People who are too perfect, charismatic, and quick to fit into any situation are almost always hiding something. I learned that distrust isn't synonymous with a lack of love, but rather a lack of protection. It's instinct. Our family was never perfect. We fought, we made mistakes, we've drifted apart before, but that experience made each of us more aware of what really matters. We became more protective of our conversations, exchanged information about scams, shared passwords and bank alerts, something we'd never done before. Personally, I never ignored my intuition again. That uncomfortable feeling, that desire to write down details, to pay attention to small contradictions. Today, I take it with me everywhere. I try to teach my son that not every beautiful story deserves to be trusted, that the sparkle in someone's eyes sometimes hides a lie, and that protecting those we love starts with an open conversation, even if it's uncomfortable. If you've come this far, you may have experienced something similar, or, perhaps, you suspect someone who has entered your routine too quickly. Don't underestimate small signs. Ask questions. Investigate. Trust what you feel. Often, it's just a detail, a look, a poorly told story that can save an entire family from the suffering we're going through. Share your experience in the comments. Your warning could make a difference in someone else's life. And never, ever underestimate the power of doubt. Sometimes, it's what separates a happy ending from a silent disaster. From here on, there is no turning back. Now, you are in the middle of this story, feeling every detail, every fear, and every choice we made. And it is impossible to leave the story the same after seeing everything that a lie can cause in an entire family. This is the kind of story that leaves its mark, because it shows that danger does not always arrive with clear signs. Sometimes it comes disguised as perfection, practiced smiles and sweet words. Now it is your turn to participate. Leave a sentence in the comments that only someone who knows the weight of this story could write. I protect my family at any cost. I want to see who truly understood the value of trusting one's own instincts. You know what you felt. The impact is real. Stories like this bring us face to face with something no one likes to admit. The safety of those we love can never be put off until later. There is no such thing as enough protection when it comes to the most important people in your life. Don't let this feeling pass without marking your place here. Like it now, because this type of story needs to be spread so that it reaches those who need to hear it. You are already part of this story. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because each new episode here could be the warning that will prevent another silent tragedy. This channel is your community, the space for those who understand that survival also means knowing how to see what no one else sees. We are already thousands of people transforming each report into protection, learning, and most importantly, a silent pact to never leave doubts for later. Here, each comment counts. Each story is a lesson on what really matters. And don't think that everything ends now. There is much more to discover, understand, and prepare for. The next video is already on the screen. What you found intense so far is just the beginning of what is yet to come. Click now and continue with me. The impossible awaits you.